Hadirin sekalian, bagi meneruskan pertandingan, majlis menjemput Speaker Dewan Tuan Haji Husni bin Ahmad Dahlan bersama-sama para pembahas naik ke pentas, dipersilakan. Untuk makluman hadirin, Tuan Haji Husni bin Ahmad Dahlan merupakan seorang guru yang berpengalaman hampir 30 tahun dalam pengajaran subjek Bahasa Inggeris. Kini beliau berkhidmat sebagai penolong kanan hal ehwal murid di Sekolah Menengah Sains Kuala, Selangor. Sementara menunggu para pembahas membuat persiapan, adalah kita imbas kembali laluan kedua-dua pasukan hingga ke peringkat akhir pada hari ini. Pada peringkat suku akhir, pasukan dari Kolej Kuala Kangsar telah menewaskan pasukan dari Sekolah Menengah Sultan Alam Shah. Pada peringkat separuh akhir pula, mereka telah meneruskan pasukan Bahas dari Sekolah Sri Putri. Seterusnya melayakkan diri ke pertandingan akhir pada pagi ini. Manakala pasukan Bahas dari Kolej Tunku Kurshiah pula, pada peringkat suku akhir mereka telah berjaya menewaskan pasukan dari Sekolah Tunku Abdul Rahman, dan pada peringkat separuh akhir mereka telah mengalahkan pasukan Bahas dari Sekolah Menengah Sains Tunku Munawir, dan seterusnya berjaya melangkah ke pertandingan akhir pada hari ini. Sekarang saya serahkan majlis kepada Tuan Speaker Dewan.
Thank you to the Master of Ceremony. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most beneficent, very pleasant morning, I would like to wish to our honorable guests. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the finals of the English language debate for the Prime Minister's Challenge Trophy for the year 2015. The motion for today is, this House believes that the United Nations Human Rights Council should be abolished. First and foremost, before the arguments begin, it gives me great pleasure to introduce members of both benches. The row of formidable young ladies on my right, representing the government, is Kolej Tunku Kurshiah. Taking on the role of the Prime Minister is Siti Mariam Chu binti Rahmat Chu. This young lady was born in Kuching, Sarawak, and aspires to be an economist. The second minister is Nurul Iman binti Muhammad Amran.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to all.
This Form 5 student hails from Bandar Baru Bangi, Selangor, and her ambition is to be a diplomat. The third minister for the government is Anis Adina Ahlan Nasri. She is a Form 5 student who hails from Shah Alam, Selangor, and she aims to be an accountant. Last but not least, the reserve speaker for the government bench is Anis Nur Atira binti Ahmad Sukari. She is a Form 4 student from Kota Baru, Kelantan, and she wants to be a financial analyst. Now, onto the row of gentlemen on my left. Representing the opposition bench is the Malay College, Kuala Kangsar. The first speaker of the opposition team is Imran bin Kamaruddin.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning.
He was born in Perak, a Form 5 student, and his ambition is to be a pediatrician. The second speaker is Amir Anik bin Abdul Haziz.
Good day.
He is in Form 4, hails from Kuala Lumpur, and he aspires to be a politician. And the third speaker for the opposition is Sheikh Muhammad Iskandar Zulkifli bin Ali.
Assalamualaikum and a very good day. Abi to all.
This young man was born in Selangor and aims to be a geologist. Last but not least, the reserve speaker for the opposition is Muhammad Nur Razik bin Marzuki. He was born in Malacca and aspires to be a famous writer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, now on to the panel of honorable adjudicators for today's debate. They are Encik Ahmad Faiz bin Yahya. They are the first adjudicator on the right is Encik Zamir Hamdi bin Hamdan. A practicing advocate and solicitor. Next, Professor Madhya, Dr. Chandran Somasundram. Professor Madhya at University of Malaya. Next, Encik Muhammad Abdul Latif. Debate trainer from International Islamic University Malaysia and also as the chief adjudicator for today's debate. Next is Puan Azura Elia Ahmad. She is a lecturer from University Technology Mara, UITM. And last but not least, Encik Ahmad Faiz bin Yahya. He is a senior engineer at Miasat. I, Husni Ahmad Dahlan, will be the speaker for this debate. Keeping the time will be my two alert assistants. They are Salis Sajida binti Osman and Sarah Arifah binti Muhammad Farid. Both are Form 4 students from College Islam Sultan Alam Shah. Ladies and gentlemen, before I proceed, it is my duty to read out the rules for today's debate. First, the assessment scheme. The primary speeches. Marks will be awarded to each debater under the following categories: substance, 30 marks; strategy, 30 marks; style, 20 marks; language, 20 marks, and the total is 100 marks. For the reply speeches, marks will be awarded to each debater under the following categories: substance, 15 marks; strategy, 15 marks; style, 10 marks; language, 10 marks, and the total is 50 marks. Now, the allocation of time. Ladies and gentlemen, during the primary speeches, each speaker will be given 8 minutes to present his or her case. Points of information are only allowed after the first minute, where the bell will be rung once. The bell will be rung once again at the end of the 7th minute. By the end of the 8th minute, the bell will be rung twice. 3 minutes will be allocated for both teams to prepare their reply speeches. To sum up their cases, 4 minutes will be given to each team. The opposition will deliver first, followed by the government. And no points of information are allowed during this time. Ladies and gentlemen, both schools were in the finals last year. While I'm sure one will go all out to maintain its title, the other, I'm certain, will give their level best to take revenge over another. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I call this House to order to present their case on today's motion. This House believes that the United Nations Human Rights Council should be abolished. I call upon the Prime Minister, Siti Mariam Chu binti Rahmat Chu.
Ladies and gentlemen, every single day we see the news and we see women in certain rural areas in India are being oppressed. We see children in Africa not even getting proper education. And we see innocent lives being killed every single day. So in all of these issues regarding human rights, where exactly does the Council, who claims to be protecting human rights, stand in all of this? We don't even know. Assalamualaikum and a very pleasant morning. I wait to Mr. Speaker, honorable educators, accurate timekeeper, worthy opponents, loyal teammates and members of the floor. With the motion that this House believes that the United Nations Human Rights Council should be abolished, coming from government side, our stance is simple. We strongly believe that the Council has tremendously failed to achieve its initial purpose, which is to uphold human rights. In fact, it has transformed into an ineffective body, and we'll prove to you in our arguments. So as a Prime Minister for today, my job is simple. I will explain to you the burden coming from government side and characterize the whole debate, and therefore giving our argument under the key phrase of ineffectiveness of the body. My second speaker will prove all of the tangible harms given by the Council, while my third speaker will deconstruct the whole case coming from government side. Why so early, boys? I'm sorry, decline. Moving on to the burden. So, what is government side trying to prove in today's debate? We believe that we want to prove that this Council will never achieve its purpose, and we believe that whatever it's doing right now is inadequate in order to uphold human rights. We believe that the world will be better off with having countries to solve their own human rights problems, or even having a multilateral discussion, for example, organizations like NATO, or we can even have a Supreme Court of Human Rights, like what the European Union is doing. So, moving on to the characterization, let me explain to you on what exactly is the United Nations Human Rights Council. We believe that the original purpose of the Council is to act as an intergovernmental body that is responsible for human rights. They claim that they strengthen and promote the protection of human rights all around the globe. But we believe that any progress being made by the Council is too slow and too minuscule, and it doesn't even create an effective impact in the end of the day. So before moving on to my arguments, yes, sir.
Progression of human rights.
All of the tangible harms given out by the Council will be explained by my second speaker, which is all her argument is all about. So moving on to my very first argument on the key phrase of ineffective body. I have three levels under this argument. Number one, let's look at the nature of the Council in the first place. We believe that the method of addressing human rights issues done by the Council are simply by making recommendations and also by writing resolutions. Meaning to say that right now, if a country is being reported to the Council for violating human rights, the Council will only write resolutions against this particular country. What is the problem with this? We believe that the problem is the very fact that because the Council does not enforce or does not impose any actions upon these countries, the problem here is that the countries don't feel urged and they don't see the necessity of upholding human rights to begin with. But even if the Council start to take actions, we believe that a bigger problem will start to occur. Because we have to recognize that the Council depends hugely on powerful countries, for example, the United States, when it comes to fundings. And we also tell you that most resolutions being made by the Council are already against Israel. And we also tell you the problem here is that if they start to take actions against Israel, the whole thing will be against superpower countries, for example, the United States. And we also tell you, even in status quo, the Council already has an agenda, item number 7, which specifically is against Israel. And we also tell you that how the United States openly condemns this agenda, and they say that they don't want to have anything to do with the agenda. Hold on, sir, I'll take you in a minute. And we also tell you how US is the biggest benefactor of Israel in the end of the day. And we'll give you an example on how US pulled away its fundings from UNESCO after UNESCO recognized Palestine as an official state. So we tell you that in the end of the day, countries like the United States will lose interest in funding the council, and we think that will cause a huge dent on the council's funding. Before moving on to my second level, yes, sir.
Thank you. If it is true that member councils are not developing human rights, why has Cuba and Saudi Arabia recently voted against violation of human rights towards the LGBT community?
So we think that in the end of the day, the policy of the council itself is very problematic. There are many writing resolutions. Fine, if you are claiming that Saudi Arabia is moving towards that progress, right? We think that there are also in status quo bigger problems that the council is not even catering to in the end of the day. So we think that that itself is a much bigger problem, something that the opposition side has to answer in the end of the day. So second level, what the council is focusing on is that out of 103 resolutions being made by the council since its very first inception in 2006, 56 of it are only focusing against Israel. I also tell you that there are 21 special sessions held to address dire humanitarian crisis, and 7 of it are particularly against Israel. To a certain extent, we think that all of these measures taken by the council is becoming unnecessary. Why? Because we know that even with all the resolutions being made against Israel, we don't see Israel improving. Because intuitively, if you have that strong of a power like Israel, why would you just stop attacking civilians and killing innocent lives just because a council recommended for you to do so? We think that it's not in the interest of Israel, and we tell you that huge funding is wasted, no progress is being made, and Israel is not even scared of the council. I'm sorry, sir, decline. But on the third level, right, even if the council will go beyond writing resolutions, it will only be another problem because then it will be an elitist body. Why? Because number one, we tell you that the bigger powers within the UN, for example, United States, China, and Russia, will be the ones who will determine who will be taken action against. Meaning to say that with all these countries, or particularly United States, being on the same side as Israel, we tell you that the actions will not be taken against the country that is recognized to be the most problematic country by the council in the first place, which is Israel. So we believe that that itself is another problem. I'm sorry, sir, decline. But on the third level, even if the resolutions work and cause changes, we still think that it's not effective and it doesn't even cater to problems regarding human rights in status quo. Why? Because we know that the council, even in status quo, is not addressing actual human rights violation in the world. For example, we still see more radical parties like the Islamic State. We see Boko Haram and even Hamas rampantly killing innocent lives. They are burning people alive. These are the kinds of things that the council is supposed to address but never addressing in the very first place. We know that in the end of the day, the council is extremely focusing on one party only and completely dismissing other radical parties, which causes bigger violation of human rights. So without that, in the end of the day, it doesn't even create improvement. So we have already proved to you how the body is ineffective due to its policy and also due to a lot of other levels that I've already explained under my argument. So before I take my seat, I want to question the government side on, firstly, what is the necessity of the existence of the council? But number two, how can the importance of the council outweigh all of the tangible harms and its ineffectivity that I've already proven in my speech? So with all those reasons, we have never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
That was Siti Mariam Chu binti Rahmat Chu. Her motto in life is, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. It means she likes to face challenges in life. Ladies and gentlemen, Winston Churchill once said, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. Now let us invite the opposition leader, Imran bin Kamaruddin, to state the opposition's objections.
When women who were oppressed in Saudi Arabia were forced to have religious constrictions, the United Nations Human Rights Council stepped in. They gave a beacon of hope towards the people. Now we can see more than ever the government of Saudi Arabia has lifted the ban on women for them to actually allow them to drive. Hasn't this been more enough than a proof to say that the Human Rights Council is adequate enough to progress our human rights violation? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good day. Firstly, I bid to the Honorable Mr. Speaker, sir, wise panel of educators, punctilious timekeeper, my comrades inside of opposition, worthy opponents inside of government, and not to forget, members of today's very majestic parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the failure inside of Prime Minister to set up good debate here, we have seen that they have not actually discharged a huge burden on their side. We must believe that on government side, they must provide you reasons as to why the council is harmful within status quo, but more than that, the alternatives that they gave, such as NATO or individual states, must actually be elaborated that why that kind of actually alternatives is far more better than the council itself. But thirdly, we tell you it's also in government's burden to defend a world after the abolishment of this council would be actually progressive for human rights. Failure to do so is failure to win in today's debate. As for opposition, we would argue that human rights would be worse off without the council, and then hence with the clash that we'll make our stance that how government will bring more harms to human rights progress. Sit down, ma'am. Let's move on to the rebuttals I have for you today in order to resolutionize what's wrong with side of government. The first technical problem we have with them is they gave you the alternative of, hey, let's make sure that NATO countries can do this. Let's make sure that individual states can do this. But there's no elaboration to why those kind of states can actually outright and actually outweigh the benefits that the council has in order to progress human rights. But secondly, right, they gave a truistic burden towards the side of opposition. They told you that the Human Rights Council is not doing much action. They gave you that idea of the Human Rights Council is only to pass resolutions. That's exactly it. The Human Rights Council is not a body that can just invade another country. It has to be deliberating. It has to be put upon discussions. There's the ability for the council to actually categorize whether a certain problem in oppressive nations is a human rights violation or not. Only then can they call for action and look for United Nations Security Council or any other governmental bodies that can help to actually solve the problem on the ground. Unfortunately, ma'am, sit down. In this case, ladies and gentlemen, since the first diva from side of government failed to set up what is the Human Rights Council, let me allow you to do this burden. The Human Rights Council was a project initiated after the ban of Human Rights Commission in 2006. After 5 years of reviewing, finally it was meant to be a permanent branch in the United Nations Security Council. Now, we tell you that more than ever, it has gained global attention, it has gained global General Assembly acceptance, and have now become a product of global support. It is kept permanent. It is a United Nations branch. This council is well represented. They forgot that the 47 seats inside the council is allocated fairly into other regions towards the world, meaning we have countries from the African countries, we have Eastern countries and Western countries representing the council. But more than that, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that the council is a majestic library of data and information, compiling, annually updating human rights track records and index. It becomes a reference to NGOs or countries who wish to put conditional aids towards other nations who are oppressive and make sure that they change. To clarify, everyone, let us be realistic. There is no council that will become perfect. It has faced challenges like any organization would, but that doesn't mean that it's necessary for you to ban it, right? Just because the United Nations Security Council failed to invade in the Rwandan genocide, are you going to abolish that? Just because Greece failed, are you going to ban the EU?
Sir.
Is that what you're trying to propose? Before I move on, yes, ma'am.
So the problem with the resolution is that countries like Israel are not even scared. And if you say that UNSC is there to cater to these problems, UNSC is not even doing anything to Israel.
Unfortunately, ma'am, that's untrue. We've seen a lot of times Israel-Palestinians are the kind of motions, are the kind of discussions that have been placed into the council. We've seen a lot of countries being pulled out of that resolution, but to the very least, we put this issue into international spotlight. How do you actually make sure that NATO or your individual states come up here and tell us that this is an international issue when it can actually be masked as selling human rights violation and can actually be masked as putting up self-interest? Deal with that problem first, ma'am. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, given those kind of alternatives, we would fight for the idea that the council must be present. Just because it has necessary harms doesn't mean that it has failed the world. We tell you that the first thing that we must understand, that if they're going to do this council, it will bring more harms than good. And the first harm on their side is how it will bring a negative perception towards how the global community acts. How is this present? The Human Rights Council is a beacon of hope. It is a beacon of change. It is places where oppressed nations come to the council to give their complaints, to file for action. But unfortunately, this is what side of government is going to take away from the people itself. But more than that, oppressed minorities have had their voices transferred. An example is in Nigeria, where cultural roots have enslaved females to have genital mutilation. They have finally received help from the council. The Human Rights Council entered the country, created a committee in Nigeria, and sent reports in and out of the country. What has happened? Soon after, the Nigerian government placed a ban on FGMs, or female genital mutilation, in terms of internalization of the problem. But more than that, ladies and gentlemen, we've seen a lot of prosecutions, like side of government wanted to claim from the LGBT community, how they're not given rights. Right now, the United Nations Human Rights Council have, with the numerical mass that they have, is now better at in helping this problem to be lifted. How so? They have once proven, based upon the Ottoman in 18th century, that the study of decriminalizing homosexualities have actually attracted OIC countries, which might be conservative, to help go against the violence on the ground. If this is not proof of how Human Rights Council has progressed, what is, ladies and gentlemen? Therefore, given all this, how that at the government side to call for an organization that has dealt with so much violations, we would also lose the credibility to act plurally in our oppressed nations to help them. Countries like Zimbabwe or the Republic of Congo would not listen to all your alternatives that you give, for example, individual states, because they believe that it's an imposition of ideologies towards them. The council represents a global perspective. That's why people would listen and change towards them even more. The conclusion towards this is the government is willing to throw up our human rights progress, and we don't want that to happen, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, we would tell you that we will lose sustainable discourse inside of status quo. There is going to be no immediate action being taken under government's world because there is no organization that is ready to deal with the problem. We tell you that opposition sustains the progress and discussion of human rights, even if the abuse does not occur. Opposition can send observers, investigators to countries with suspected oppressive nation and call out for necessary action. Government will forever be slower in human rights progress. They will fluctuate the idea and interest of states to act upon human rights abuses. That is the negligence that we put on side of government. We tell you that your side brings more harm than good. In this case, in comparison towards the government, we tell you that they are weak in actually changing human rights progress, because a world without the council is a world without the hope. A world without the council is a world without any organization to take place and be ready to listen towards the problems of the world. We are telling you that if we want to solve problems in Syrian conflict, we want to solve problems within our country, we want to solve problems in a lot of organizations, we must work together. That can only be achieved by this council. We have never been more prouder to propose that we want to share to you that human rights can be for this council.
That was the opposition leader, Imran bin Kamaruddin. Imran wants to win the debate, but in his motto he also states, strength does not come from winning. Your struggles develop your strengths. When you go through hardships and decide not to surrender, that is strength. That's his motto. Now, without further delay, let us invite the second minister from the government, Nurul Iman binti Muhammad Amran.
Test. Ladies and gentlemen, when you have a council that discusses issues about human rights, we don't think it's fair for a council, for a neutral body, to be selective when it comes to discussing about issues they have to attend to. We think that when you want to discuss about issues of human rights, all issues have to be attended to. But before I move on to our case today, a few rebuttals regarding side opposition. Number one, they told us on how Cuba and Saudi Arabia have been showing progress over years. We concede that there are certain progresses that have shown partially resolved issues regarding issues of human rights. But we think that the harms that this council brings onto today's table outweighs the certain slow progress that this council brings, but I'll later go through that in my arguments. But number two, they told us on how this council only exists as a body that discusses
things about human rights. That's exactly our problem. Because we think that there are already numerous discussions happening about Syria, about Israel. And there are 56 reports out of 103 about Israel, but no action has been taken upon Israel. And Israel is killing massive people day by day. This is a problem we want to attend to. But number three, we think that under their side, they told us that this council acts as a body which proves global perspective and has international scrutiny. Even in Syria school, media will always attend towards these bad states like Palestinian and Rohingyans, and media is always present for them to, for the international, for global to actually realize what's happening in these states that actually that human rights are violated. But sorry, I'll take you in a minute. And also, they have told you time and time again how, the existence of this council brings about numerous benefits. But the only thing they've proven to us is the very fact that there's progress. And we have proved to you on how progress is slow. And more people are getting killed day by day. We think there are more effective ways that can be taken at the end of the day. But before I move on to my case, the handsome one.
If it is true that the Human Rights Council is always slow in action, why is it that they had 3 emergency meetings to deal with Bashar al-Assad's regime and put him under multiple sanctions?
Mr. Speaker, the idea about Bashar al-Assad being put in multiple sanctions, I'll get to that in my arguments, right? That it clashes directly with my arguments. So what exactly is my argument today? Why is the standard of human rights cannot progress under the ambit of the Council? This is the question that I will address to today. On the first level, how it creates unfair representation. What do I mean by this? This means that the representation is insufficient. When you have 47 countries representing the whole world, how sure that these 47 countries can address and can understand the states that actually that human rights are actually violated? Because when 5 countries represent an entire region, this does not mean that they can cater to each and every country in that particular region human rights issues. Let me give you an example on how Thailand and Malaysia, we have different ideologies of human rights. We have different understandings, and we have different human rights problems to address. So say if Malaysia is in the council, you cannot expect Malaysia to address the issues of human rights that happens in Thailand, and you cannot expect Malaysia to understand the state of the people in Thailand at the end of the day. We think on a comparative analysis, when you have regional blocs, multilateral organizations, or also other kinds of ways, we think that this creates a more focused discussion. But not only that, now nations can represent their own countries, meaning to say that nations can represent their own issues, and they have the upper hand and explain it. This is my issue, and this is the issue that I want to address to. So therefore, this creates a more effective discourse, and this is a more effective way. But under the council, what they only do is that they only make reports or resolutions based on the investigations that they make. What is the problem with this? This means that the council has to prioritize the more important issues that happens in the council, or the more important issues that has been brought about in the council itself. This means that they are unable to address to each and every single thing, or each and every single issue that has been addressed to the council itself. Now smaller conflicts will be dismissed, and smaller nations will have to back down in order for this council to be able to attend to issues like Israel, or North Korea, or Syria, which the world already knows that these are big issues to attend to. But before I move on, last one.
Thank you. How can you say that the council does not represent the global idea or the global community when the council members are voted into via a General Assembly in the United Nations itself?
We think that this, just by voting a certain country into the council, does not mean this particular country can represent the countries in the region. We think that when you have different countries addressing different issues of human rights, this is when each country has to come up and represent their own set of human rights. But you only have 47 countries, and this is a misrepresentation of the whole region. But also number 2, what exactly are the effects of this unfair representation? This creates influence on, because you have different levels of powers in the council. What does this mean? When you have big powers like the United States in this council, and you have smaller countries like Vietnam in the council, what does this mean? This means that the smaller countries like Vietnam have to back down, because you have to concede. Third world countries depend on the United States, depend on Russia, depend on these big countries for diplomatic ties, for economical ties, but also for political ties. So in order for them to keep these ties close, they will have to support big powers and big states like the United States, and this creates a bigger problem. An issue that happened in the council itself, on how Russia and China are the recent appointees of the council. And everyone knows in the world that Russia and China protect Bashar al-Assad. What does this mean? When you protect Bashar al-Assad, this means that you are allies with Bashar al-Assad. This ultimately means that you're being allies, meaning that Russia and China will do whatever it takes to make sure that any reports made on Bashar al-Assad will be kept in the dark. But more often than not, these reports will never see the light of day and therefore will never be made the resolution of the United States Security Council. And this is the problem we want to address at the end of the day. Mr. Speaker, there's a bigger problem and there's bigger harms happening in the Council, something that side of opposition failed to address to from the very get-go. But also on the third level, on the harms that actually exist, and this is a tangible harm. This harm, the harm that the Council brings about is that it does not incentivize people to take instant action. What do I mean by this? This means that now countries depend on an ineffective council because the world depends on this particular council. Side opposition agreed. The world depends on the council because the council is somehow a hope for the world. Therefore, if you put a dependency on a council to resolve issues because of the reputation they uphold, because the whole world knows if you're a member state of the council, you uphold human rights. This is the problem that we have to adjust to because the sort of reputation they hold brings about a lot of effects towards other countries. But this is impossible. This is impossible for them to adjust to all issues because of the ineffectiveness of the council, which has already been clearly stated by my Prime Minister. So what happens then? It becomes a tangible harm because countries will not be incentivized to take any direct action on a nation which violates human rights. For example, we think that massive amounts of reports are made in Israel, but still, Israel continues to violate human rights. We think, on a comparative analysis, why is side government and why is our world better without a council? We think that when you have a world without a council, you garner or you propagate the idea of active participation. What do you mean by this? Active participation means that you maximize participation from other people. But not only that, I'll give you an example on how, during the Bosnia case in 1994, on how there was a genocide and 7,709 people lives were lost. So what was their solution? Their solution to that was that NATO made an unilateral action where they initiated airstrikes. This is sort of action that we want to make, and this is sort of solution that we want people to attend to. So, Mr. Speaker, if you want the world to change for the better, go aside, government. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Nurul Iman binti Muhammad Amran, acting as the second minister from the government. She has a very motivating motto in life. She said, "Gems cannot be polished without friction, nor man without trials." Now let us invite the second speaker from the opposition, Amir Anik bin Abdul Aziz.
The Bosnian genocide was a good example of how the Human Rights Council has worked in the past. Sure, we agree that NATO was the one who did the intervention, but that was because a veto was made in the Security Council when action was supposed to be taken. But how did this issue get to NATO in the first place, and what made them want to act? It was the Human Rights Council that declared this issue a human rights violation. We believe this is the only medium to ensure that this labeling can exist. They have yet to tell us why that is a fault of the Human Rights Council, not the Security Council. Before I move on to my issues, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and a very pleasant morning. I bid the honorable panel of adjudicators, punctual timekeeper, comrades in opposition, opponents in government, and all present within today's august house. Before I move on to the rebuttals that I would have and my argumentation, let's analyze the burden that side government have put onto themselves but have not proved. They argue that the Human Rights Council is inefficient and ineffective. But does this necessarily mean that all the alternatives can meet that standards? They try to tell us that the Council was not necessarily attentive to all issues on the ground. Yet they argue that personal representation is better. We question, How is it that Sudan, or the people within Sudan, can bring issues to the global community and say that these are individuals that are oppressed within my grounds? We don't see how countries or LGBTs within Uganda could come to the United States and tell them that I'm being harmed and you must act. In these circumstances, we find it extremely hard for people on the ground to have the same political leverage like the United Nations Human Rights Council. Let's argue that in their world, they have to deal with things like media censorship. They have to deal with things like proximity censorship that would exist within a lot of countries. Let's argue that human rights abuses against women in Arab countries is extremely rampant, but they cannot make a fuss about it because, ladies and gentlemen, other Arab countries within those regions also condemn this act and also condone this abuse. It's extremely hard for countries or for the people on the ground to use media to propagate these ideologies or get attention because of censorship. This is something that government has yet to prove. But more than that, why is our alternative better? We argue that people on the ground at least have an avenue because NGOs have a stable place and a stable medium to go out and carry out these reports, and a stable medium for discussions to actually take place. In all its benefits, ladies and gentlemen, we would argue that NGOs now have a better medium for them to advocate for these rights, to advocate for this change, because at the very least, out of responsibility, council members must act. Out of responsibilities, council members must have discussions. The comparison is this. They would allow NGOs or unilateral bodies to take action without necessarily identifying or whether or not these individual states or individual independent bodies have the power to advocate for change. Nobody is going to listen to an NGO without critical mass. Nobody is going to listen to an NGO without political or military power. We would argue that the United Nations Human Rights Council is very much valid. No thank you, ma'am. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, they would argue that a unilateral intervention or unilateral actions are far better because they are more sustainable and because they are quicker. But the question is this: that is also largely predicated upon the moral consciences of most countries to act. We would argue that a lot of countries are less likely going to go to war or less likely want to implement sanctions because those are things that necessarily harm them as well. That is resources and money spent. They would have to argue why the responsibility to humanity is far greater than their responsibility to the economic state. Within those circumstances, we feel the imperative on their side is not present. We would argue, however, in comparison to our side, when we force these individuals to be responsible of their actions, but more than that, because these individuals have to take action by maintenance of perception. These are countries that are probably going to make more sustainable invasions and more sustainable action onto countries that are belligerent. More than that, sir, they would also argue that they want Muslim countries to enter Israel and Palestine to take issues into their own hands. We would argue that Muslim countries can do this without the existence of the Council. It is not mutually exclusive. They do it anyway. The question is whether or not they'll be using human rights as an excuse. But more than that, ladies and gentlemen, even if this were to deter the actions, what is the imperative for Muslim countries to declare themselves active enemies of the United States if they enter Israel, Palestine, and deal with the conflict on the ground? We would argue that the idea of interventions, meaning to say that when you intervene, you declare yourself an enemy of another state or another alliance, is good of an imperative to say, I should not intervene. In these circumstances, we don't see how it is sustainable. Yes, ma'am.
How can you ensure that these 47 countries that represent the people in the Council can represent the countries of their region well? Because we see that different nations have different issues of human rights to address to. Please get into that.
That's exactly the point. It is because of the separation in ideologies that they must come to a place where they can discuss a globally recognized and a globally acceptable standard of human rights. This is unprecedented because they allow countries like Uganda to continuously categorize homosexual massacre as their standards of human rights. They would blatantly disregard all the other labor union crimes that have been going on in China as their standards of human rights. We beg to disagree. We have to say that China must bring these standards into a council where they can discuss and be criticized on whether or not this is an acceptable metric. We would argue that it's far more important to have a universalized standard of human rights, even if it means that discussions must take place. Even if it means that it may be a little bit political, we would argue that the outcomes are far better. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the argumentation where I talk to you how we make belligerent states on the council change and why that's the best for human rights. On two levels of analysis, ladies and gentlemen, the first of which is how we make it or on government side, it is far more easy for belligerent council members to block international spotlight. In government side, ladies and gentlemen, states or belligerent council members are not accountable to anything besides their sovereignty as a state. We disagree. We would beg to say that these are countries that deserve an additional responsibility that we can hold them to. We would argue that the Human Rights Council provides check and balances, like continuous checks of council members to ensure that council members are not abusive. This is a responsibility that we can ensure because countries are less likely willing to be hypocritical. Because countries want to remain on the council, they would adopt the responsibilities that the council provides them. We would argue that it's far more important in keeping these individuals in check because we allow them to face the problem of hypocrisy if they were to continue abuses on the ground. But on the second level of analysis, why is it better that we include them in decision-making processes of determining what's important for human rights? We would beg to argue that it is far more important to allow belligerent states to feel as though their voices are heard, but in comparison to government's case, where they force these individual states like China, whose ideologies are probably not the most accepted within the world, to be antagonized by the situation because the global community or the United States wants to condemn their actions instead of the global community, instead of a multilateral organization. We would argue that the rebellion under countries like China and Russia is at a high because they want to advocate for their principles, because there is no standard metric as to what qualifies as human rights. They are more willing to defend that their version is right. We would argue that it's far more important for this medium of discussion to take place in a more diplomatic matter rather than allowing proxy wars to happen within grounds itself because of the defense in ideologies. Ladies and gentlemen, we would argue for a world of peace. We would argue for a world of humanity. The four colors that MCKK represent are the four colors of humanity.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the second speaker from the opposition, Amir Anik bin Abdul Aziz. This handsome gentleman has the looks of Shah Rukh Khan in his younger days, I believe. But I believe the adjudicators will not consider this point in their marks. Now, for the third minister, let us call forth Anis Adina Ahlan Nasri.
Ladies and gentlemen, 53 resolutions about Israel in the past 9 years since the council existed, but we don't see improvement in that land. We don't see the situation getting better. We think that right now we need to ensure that this council has a purpose, and if it doesn't serve a purpose, we shouldn't be supporting it. But before that, Assalamu alaikum, and a very pleasant morning. I beg to Madam Chair, Speaker, honorable adjudicators, accurate timekeeper, worthy opponents, loyal teammates, and members of the floor. Debating on a motion, this House believes that the United Nations Human Rights Council should be abolished. As the third minister of government side, I wholeheartedly agree with this motion because we believe that right now the Council has failed to achieve its initial purpose to strengthen and promote the whole idea of human rights, and which is the reason why we need to ensure that we remove its existence. We think that right now its existence is merely ineffective and it is only draining the resources of the United Nations, which can be put to better use. We can prove several harms that will outweigh all their so-called exclusive benefits, something that can also exist in pre-existing measures within status quo. So, what will I be doing for you today? My stance and my job is simple. I'll be deconstructing the case of opposition and proving to you why this case goes to government. First issue, on how they claim that right now there is a need for discussion and we need a platform, hence the reason why the council needs to exist. We need a council because right now the world needs a platform for all these nations to get together and discuss about differences and issues and ensure that these things do not prolong. Several responses. Firstly, we believe that right now, if this were the case for today, how do you justify the problem within the council? For example, first response, lack of cooperation within member states existing within the council. We see that, and we can scrutinize in 2000 and 2010, when China was in the council, we can see that China refused to take part in country-specific decisions because they feel as if this will harm their self-interest. This proves that right now people themselves within the council, even though they have so-called credibility when they first entered the council, refuse to actually give cooperation for the betterment of the standards of human rights for the global community. We believe that right now, even if people were to penetrate into this council, they merely do it because they feel as if this will give them a personal benefit, something that's very selfish and is not at all aligned with what the United Nations has in mind. But second response, we see that also right now when it comes to making resolutions, because that's the only thing that this council does, is that right now all the resolutions are concentrated on issues about Israel. And yes, we think that even if your whole idea is that right now maybe it's good that we focus on one particular issue and this particular situation can improve. But this thing has been ongoing for so long and we don't see any improvement at all from Israel. We only see that right now the situation is getting worse. Do you think that right now there are a lot of other issues that are being dismissed? Something that's been pointed out by my previous speakers, but obviously the opposition side wasn't listening. We think that right now there are a lot of other states that also have even greater issues that are also being hurt. People on the ground are suffering and crimes against humanity are also taking place in these regions. For example, in Zimbabwe, or even in Cuba, or even in a lot of other Arab nations. We think that right now, because right now they selectively choose the kind of resolutions and the kind of issues that they want to handle, proves that right now there is a specific biasness within the council, something that contradicts with their whole idea of how that right now this is a neutral platform for discussion. But before I move on to my next response, yes, the first speaker.
If the council is abolished, will your alternative to act unilaterally have the same political mass, have same global representation, and solve Israel-Palestine conflict?
Thank you, sir. We believe that right now, yes, when we actually do a comparative analysis between what multilateral or even regional blocs have to offer, it will perform way better. Why so? Because we think that right now, when you actually have regional multilateral efforts, of course, you don't have a military or defense mechanism to actually enforce these kind of things, just as how United Nations also doesn't have a military to actually enforce upon these people. They can only write resolutions to begin with. They do not have soldiers or armies to actually invade a particular land, which is the reason why it's not even legit for you to use United Nations. But we think that right now, when you use multilateral or regional blocks, what you can do is right now you enforce these people to actually sit down and talk about it. And why is this different? It's exclusive only to regional blocks. Because right now people acknowledge that within my region, I need to ensure that my position and my credibility is maintained. Because right now my political stance and my economical ties are contingent upon the people neighboring my country. The reason why I have to sit down with Myanmar or Indonesia and solve the Rohingya problem to begin with. This is the reason why the Rohingya problem is totally ignored by this council. We can see that right now, even though a lot of people are floating on rickety boats in the middle of the sea, we think that right now people are not putting enough focus on this particular issue. Shame on the council. Secondly, we also think that right now when it comes to the council, even if you claim that right now we can actually agree on this particular issue, we think that right now differences in ideologies will actually prevent this from happening. Why so? Because as stated by my previous speaker, my second minister, she stated on how that right now difference in ideologies mean that just because I am in the council doesn't mean I will fight for the rights of a member of a country from the same region as I am. Meaning to say that right now this is the reason why, even though there are a lot of other states around Israel, or there's no one actually defending Palestine. We think that right now people are only making decisions based on what they feel is right, which is the reason why right now we don't think that the differences in ideologies can actually sustain and work conducively in the environment of the council. Done with that issue, moving on to the second issue, how they feel as if it's necessary for us to use this council and standardize human rights, because they feel as if when we have a set of human rights that's more generalized, it's easier for us to settle cases. You think that this is very, very problematic. Why? Because if this were the case, you are putting a blanket rule upon all the nations in the world. Because we have to scrutinize the kind of countries we have on earth. We see that right now there are a lot of very liberal countries like the United States and very conservative countries like the Saudi Arabia. With these kind of differences in mind, how is it fair that you're going to standardize the human rights and ensure that they're going to agree on one thing in particular? Which is the reason why I'm going to respond to their previously on the whole LGBT issue, whereby Saudi Arabia voted against it. Exactly, because you cannot enforce these people to go against their ideologies, which has been implemented in them since before, it has been centuries, because it is their culture, it is the idea that the people that uphold, and you cannot enforce these people to actually go against a particular stance. These people exist because they exist and they depend on their government to ensure that their rights and their ideologies are protected, because as a human being, I'm entitled to my own set of human rights and how I choose to perceive it. I shouldn't be dictated by the kind of human rights that the United Nations want to impose on me. Last one, sir.
Motivated.
We think that right now, when you are telling me that these people are going to be politically motivated. We think that right now at least a defense mechanism actually exists and people can actually do something. We can see when we compare with what the council actually can do, it's only proposed resolutions. And why is this harmful? Because these resolutions are only put on show to prove that, hey, I'm actually doing work. But what's going to be done? Because people read the resolutions or they don't even read at all and nothing is being done. Because at the end of the day, these kind of resolutions have to be passed to the Security Council, a council that actually has veto powers with UK and US, France, China, people who actually can easily veto out when they realize that these kind of issues will be politically inclined towards their policy. We think that right now this is the reason why we cannot be in support of this council, because we feel as if right now there are other alternatives that can actually provide you the kind of so-called exclusive benefits that side opposition tried to propose, and with that said, we can also mitigate the kind of harms that's clearly existing within the council. We're all for the idea that right now human rights shouldn't be standardized. And if you really are an advocate of human rights, why are you imposing your ideas upon other people? You should be protecting them, not abusing their rights. But secondly, I've also told you on how right now it is important that if you want to have a platform with discussion, it must be conducive. You cannot just have it for the sake of. Debating for the last time for TKC, I've never been prouder to propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Anis Adina Ahlan Nasri. This fierce and fearless young lady has no fear of failing and falling. That's why in her motto she said, fall 7 times, stand up 8. Now that the government has had its say, let us call for the opposition whip to counter all points put forth by the government bench. Please welcome Sheikh Muhammad Iskandar Zulkifli bin Ali.
Test. Mic test. It's amazing how short and flowery speeches from government side are more than enough to make me feel that human rights is not important, to the point that United Nations should stop fighting for human rights, to the point that United Nations should give up on the hopes that we have from our side of the house. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good day Abi to our panel of educators, both benches today's debate, and not to forget most appreciated audience that are present in today's debate. First of all, factual mistakes from side of government. It is untrue that the Human Rights Council already have a fixed set of moral standards that always fall back in determining whether something is a human rights violation or not. Why do we say so? Because that is the reason why every time there is a complaint rising to the council, there is always a discussion, there is always a voting system that will always continuously vote something, whether it is human rights violation or not. The discussion that happens every time a complaint rises show to you that the council does not have a fixed set of moral standards to judge whether something is violation or not. They always discuss whether something is violation of human rights or not, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, side of government try to lie to you, we think this is very reprehensible. But second of all, let's look at the burden that the government took into this debate. The burden that they took was to prove how Human Rights Council has tremendously failed to achieve its purposes. And they provided the harms of Human Rights Council to prove this. What's the problem of this, ladies and gentlemen? The harms they provided are caused by the system of Human Rights Council. If we can change the system and those harms can be minimalized, would you then okay with the existence of a council that specifically discuss about human rights, ladies and gentlemen? If the problem of government is the problem of how education system is not good, are you going to ban education, or are you going to fix and amend the system of education to make sure education works? We think this is a mismatch, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's problematic. But even if they wish to be absolute and say, no, the Human Rights Council can never overcome all those obstacles, they have not proved to us that a world without a council is beneficial. For example, if education is problematic and the system is like a sinking boat, you can never save them. They have never proved to us why a world without education is beneficial. That's the problem with the government's burden that they took in the early of their speeches. But before I move further, yes, any of you, the pretty one.
We've already proved to you on how if the council changes method and go beyond writing resolutions, it will become an elitist body where it will be governed by countries like United States.
Hold your horses. I'll come to that later. I mean Iman, the pretty one. Look, second question. Is United Nations Human Rights Council an effective body? The government claim one thing. They only write resolution. This is why I come to you, Prime Minister. What's wrong with this argument? United Nations Security Council is the one taking action. As long as the Human Rights Council serves its main function to discuss, to vote, to label something as a human rights violation and call for an action to the United Nations Security Council, we think we should not abolish it because it already serves the main purpose that the reason why they are invented at the first place. They accuse Human Rights Council for not taking actions. The problem is Human Rights Council is not the one taking actions under United Nations. Human Rights Council only decide whether something is human rights violation or not and call for an action so that United Nations Security Council takes action. The false accusation is just a mere reason they want to make United Nations Human Rights Council looks bad. But second of all, this is the response to LO's POI. When we asked them, what about Saudi Arabia? There's improvement happening. She said, no, other problems also exist. There are the bigger problems that are still not solved. Look, they are expecting too much from a single body, ladies and gentlemen. We concede that no organization is perfect in the world. Nothing is ever perfect. But we must also understand that Human Rights Council already done something in status quo. You cannot expect Human Rights Council to address and solve every single issue in the whole world regarding human rights violation. You must consider the fact that Human Rights Council is never a Superman or a Batman that solves everything in Gotham City. That's impossible, Mr. Speaker. But the third issue that came out under this argument is this issue of politicized decision. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, Human Rights Council is not really politically inclined. Why do we say so? Because Human Rights Council does not practice veto power just like Security Council or other organizations. I'll take you later. Because Human Rights Council practice equal vote, meaning to say that every member in the state, in the council, has only one vote towards an action. There are 47 states. Even if Russia, China, United States were to politically incline to something else, to protect their allies, and to vote that is not considering moral, but considering political, we believe that there are another 44 states that can vote against these three superpowers and still counted as equal vote, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's the best part of Human Rights Council that they missed out. But before I move on, yes.
So we think that right now the United Nations, under their Universal Periodic Review, promised to ensure that right now all 193 United Nations and state members are protected. How are you going to say that right now we're expecting too much when you're the one who promised to do so?
I promise a lot of things to my mom. I promised a lot of things to my dad. But that does not mean I have to be a perfect son that fulfill everything. Because I'm not perfect. Because everyone is not perfect. Iman, Anis, and Mariam, we are not perfect. We are human. The Human Rights Council is just individuals, group of individuals trying their best to protect people. You are expecting them to be supermans, and we believe that's too much. Second of all, ladies and gentlemen, government then argue that smaller countries in the council would not vote against superpower. Ladies and gentlemen, even if that is true, that problem is not solved just by abolishing Human Rights Council. Then are you okay if you remove these superpowers from the council? If the only problem with the council is the existence of Russia, China, United States, why do we remove them? If we remove them, then are you okay with the principle that a body should exist to discuss specifically about human rights? We think that's false on the other side. They say ban the Human Rights Council and individual nation states would all go fighting for human rights. We think that's the question today. Would they act? We believe, number one, ladies and gentlemen, not necessarily. They could be war fatigue. They could have no interest of acting in the Brunei's human rights violation, for example. Under those circumstances, we have no one to act. Because under their world, they ban a council. That means they are depending on the free will of individual state to act. If there is no state wanted to go against Russia like they claim, ladies and gentlemen, then we have no one to discuss about human rights. Is that the world that we want to live in? We don't think so. But what if they act? This is why they claim that the act is. This is why we believe, ladies and gentlemen, the individual state actions would be harmful because it can lead to proxy wars. Because the political division that they explain in Human Rights Council does not solved. It's not solved just by abolishing it. That means political division would then be channeled to the real world. That means Russia would only support their allies in the real world. The United States would only support their allies in the real world. What happened next? A proxy war. For example, in Uganda itself, Russia would support Uganda for their policies, but United States would not support Uganda for their policies. A proxy war happens. Do you agree with the proposal that allows a battleground for human rights ideologies to happen and sacrifice the lives of individuals on the ground, Mr. Speaker? We believe that's problematic. But at the end of the day, we believe that their alternative is not exclusive to our debate, to our case as well. United Nations or EU or NATO or US or any state can take their actions, or the NGOs itself can take their actions with the existence of Human Rights Council. Just because you abolish Human Rights Council, that does not mean they can act better, because they can act right now with the existence of Human Rights Council. And plus, instead, in fact, they act a lot better if they go to Human Rights Council. Because why? Human Rights Council is consisting of 47 states and members, ladies and gentlemen. They have a bigger power, bigger leverage power upon other countries, upon oppressive states. That means if United States believe that they need to take action, they go to Human Rights Council and bring another 46 state member with them. It's a bigger cloud. It's a bigger negotiating power that they can offer to Uganda, offer to oppressive states. That's why we believe is important in today's debate. At the end of the day, we believe Human Rights Council is needed because they discuss specifically about human rights and they call for actions. And for all those reasons, I've never been prouder to say opposition will win today's debate.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was the opposition whip, Sheikh Muhammad Iskandar Zulkifli bin Ali. Now, this young lad talked like a politician, so I think he should reconsider his ambition to be a geologist. Ladies and gentlemen, now each team will be given 3 minutes to discuss their reply speeches. The House will adjourn momentarily for 3 minutes. Thank you, timekeepers. I call the House to order once again. Members of the August House, this debate will resume with the reply speeches from the opposition to sum up their case. I call upon Amir Anik bin Abdul Aziz.
Test, test, test. Nine years after the council is established in the year 2015, China has revoked their labor laws. Russia has signed a treaty to condemn LGBT violence, and women in Saudi Arabia can finally drive. We feel that participation in the council and the existence of this council has done nothing but pressure participating countries to make reforms, because we provide them an avenue to be hypocritic and be pointed out by the international community and the council itself. This is a benefit that side government had blatantly disregarded because it was convenient. We feel that despite their negligence to our case, in a vacuum, why have they failed? They would put us in a world where the only recourse Palestinian kids have to the dealing of the conflict, the Israeli conflict, is hope that the United States would be merciful enough to maintain their standards of human rights and intervene on the basis of morality rather than prioritize their alliances with Israel. This is the only recourse they give to the children of Palestine in comparison to the recourse we can give you. At the very least, people on the ground are aware that their discussions are taking place. People on the ground are aware that attention is being given to them and due consideration exists. Even if choices may be political, at the very least, they are brought up. The world that opposition lives in is a world of transparency. The world that government lives in is a world where human rights abuses can be diluted, can be masked by saying that that is an extension of sovereignty. We would argue that that is not a world we want to live in. Secondly, they would live in a world where the only counterbalance, the only counter-narrative to the propagation of China's version of human rights is the intervention of the United States to uphold their version of human rights. We would argue that this is where lives are lost. This is where people don't come to a consensus. This is where enemies are made. This is where people die. We would argue that a more diplomatic medium must exist for the United States and China to come to a consensus as to what quantifies as human rights. It doesn't matter if it's political, at the very least representation exists. At the very least, countries in the eastern region of the world can have a say in what goes on in the West. At the very least, countries in the West can argue as to why the standards of human rights in the East is wrong. It doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen. The point is, these people are there. The point is, something changes. More than that, ladies and gentlemen, what have we told you about the Council? We told you that even if the process takes long, even if discussions are extremely counterproductive, at the very least, when there is a labeling of a problem as a human rights violation, it gains clout. It is given attention because it is seen as a human rights violation, not a unilateral problem that Uganda is facing. We also give hope to people on the ground that something is being changed, but more than that, we give hope for the people on the ground to know that the world is coming together and the world is liberating as a whole. More than that, we provide a platform for countries to identify regions that have been discriminating, that have been violating human rights to the masses. Because we create a data block and a library for NGOs to send reports, for discussions to be carried out, and more than that, ladies and gentlemen, we allow the people on the ground to see that the global community and everyone in it is paying just as much attention to human rights as all these other NGOs and as the United States. We would argue that tranquility and globalization is the best. Ladies and gentlemen, in the year 2015, we would argue that humanity has come a long way. We would argue that this is only due to the existence of the Council and only due to the considerations and political concessions that countries would make to make this change. For all those reasons, MCKK has never been prouder to stand for humanity as we have always have.
Thank you, Amir Anik bin Abdul Aziz. summing up their case for the opposition team. Now, from the government, who has the final say in today's debate, I call upon Nurul Iman binti Muhammad Amran.
Test. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the reply speech arena. It is not our problem inside government if the handsome third speaker over there doesn't want to commit to his promises to his mother. But our problem is when, in the context of human rights, when civilians are killed day by day, and when people are deprived of their rights, this is the problem because you don't think that it's fair for a council like United Nations Human Rights Council to dismiss certain issues and to be selective when it comes to discussing human rights. So in my reply speech, I'll prove to you on how our case have been further enhanced by all three speakers, and I'll prove to you on how the things that said by side opposition has been fairly catered to by all three speakers. So I'll prove to you on how with the council you show no effectivity, and with the council there is effectiveness to begin with. So what happens if we have a council? What happens with the council? If you have a council, you only make reports and you only make resolutions. Therefore, countries don't feel urged to uphold human rights. But even if the third speaker from side opposition told us that, if you find a flaw in the system, then you change the system. We think that even if you change the system and you allow this council to go beyond resolutions and have council taking actions, two different situations will happen. Number one, it's either bigger powers that US will dominate the council, meaning they'll try their best to garner support from smaller countries, or situation number two, they'll just lose interest in this council and they'll stop funding, and later on this council will have a bigger impact onto its council. We see no effectivity. But without the council, we have proved on how regional blocs and multilateral organizations already exist in status quo. And this creates active participation, which has never been responded from side opposition. We've proved to you on how there's things such as the Kurdish Human Rights Project, on how countries like Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and Iran are working together in improving the state of their human rights in their own countries. These are the kind of actions that have been taken by countries because they concede that the United Nations Human Rights Council is bringing slow progress. Even if they do bring progress, the progress is slow and they need to take a further step. This is the thing that we want to propagate to society. But also, on the level how now the clash between international scrutiny and how they want to allow global concession of human rights. We've responded to you and told you that when you have a global concession of human rights, or when you put international scrutiny because of this council, what you do is you put a blanket standard on the human rights, which is created by my third speaker, on how she said, we have a dichotomy of understanding of human rights. And when you allow a global concession, what happens is that you don't allow people of different understandings to discuss, and this only creates further harms in the council itself. And within number two, media already exists to scrutinize the acts of violation of human rights globally, which have never been responded by side opposition. We think that media is already sufficient enough to show to the world that, hey, Palestinians are hungry, they are starving. People like the Rohingyans are homeless, they are houseless, and they need a place to stay. These are the things that have never been responded to. But the flaw in opposition, number one, they never prove exclusive benefits because everything they have said can happen under their case, and we have proved to you exclusively. But even if they have proved that there are benefits, it's only a small amount of progress, and it's insufficient. But number two, they have never responded to two things we have talked to you about, and how when you actually improve the system, what you do is that you create an elitist body, and now fundings will be affected, and how the council will not be effective at the end of the day. But also number two, they have never responded to the idea on how countries will be dependent on the council. Because you have to understand that smaller nations depend on the council to actually resolve human rights issues, but this council will never resolve issues for these smaller countries because they have bigger issues to attend to. Side opposition have failed to say that. Under their case, they only prove to you 2 or 3 progressing countries. But what about the other 103 countries that are yearning for their human rights to be heard? We think that so long as so far the Council exists, people will fail to realize, and they will never realize, that they need to take a step further to improve the state of human rights, because just like opposition, they think that they are convinced that corrupted discussions are enough, but we don't think so. We think that world without Council is better when you take further step into improving the state of human rights. With that, go inside government.
Thank you, Nurul Iman. Ladies and gentlemen, the verbal war has been fought, and the battle of wits has run its course. With that, the finals of the English language debate for the Prime Minister's Challenge Trophy for the year 2015 has come to an end. Napoleon Hill once said, "Think twice before you speak, because your words and influence will plant the seed of either success or failure in the mind of another." Unquote. Thank you to the members of both benches. Thank you to the honorable educators. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being wonderfully attentive audience in today's debate. Now I would like to hand over the ceremony to the Master of Ceremony. Back to you, T.S. Madira.
Terima kasih Tuan Haji Husni bin Ahmad Dahlan. Begitulah tadi kita telah dapat menyaksikan kehebatan kedua-dua pasukan bahas bahasa Inggeris yang telah menegakkan usul masing-masing. Sama ada usul diterima atau ditolak, kita serahlah kepada panel juri yang akan menentukannya. Seterusnya, penyampaian cenderahati kepada Speaker Dewan dan panel hakim bahas bahasa Inggeris. Dengan ini majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan Yang Berbahagia Tuan Haji Abdul Ghani bin Muhammad Niza, Pengarah Bahagian Pengurusan Sekolah Berasrama Penuh Sekolah Kecemerlangan, untuk menjemput dan mengiringi Yang Berbahagia Encik Nizam Sani, Naib Presiden Kanan Pemasaran dan Komunikasi Bank Rakyat, untuk naik ke pentas bagi menyempurnakan acara penyampaian cenderahati kenang-kenangan. Dipersilakan. Dengan segala hormatnya, dipersilakan Tuan Speaker Dewan Bahas Bahasa Inggeris Tuan Haji Husni bin Ahmad Dahlan untuk menerima cenderahati kenang-kenangan. Dipersilakan. Seterusnya dipersilakan barisan panel hakim yang diketuai oleh Yang Berbahagia Ketua Hakim Encik Muhammad bin Abdul Latif dari Universiti Islam Antarabangsa. Dipersilakan Yang Berbahagia Puan Azura Eli Ahmad dari Universiti Teknologi Mara. Dipersilakan Yang Berbahagia Profesor Madya Dr. Chandran Sumasundram dari Universiti Melayu. Dipersilakan Yang Berbahagia Encik Ahmad Faiz bin Yahya, Jurutera Kanan di Mesat. Dan yang terakhir dipersilakan Yang Berbahagia Encik Zamir Hamdi bin Hamdan, Pegawai Bela dan Pengacara. Majlis mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada Yang Berbahagia Encik Nizam Sani atas kesudian beliau menyampaikan cenderahati kenang-kenangan itu sebentar tadi. Untuk makluman hadirin sekalian, keputusan pertandingan akhir bahas Bahasa Inggeris yang berlangsung sebentar tadi hanya akan diumumkan bersama-sama keputusan bahas Bahasa Melayu yang akan berlangsung sebentar lagi. Majlis akan berhenti rahat seketika untuk beri laluan kepada jawatan kuasa kerja melakukan persiapan. Para hadirin diminta untuk berada semula di tempat duduk masing-masing sebelum kita mulakan acara seterusnya. Sekian, wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.